Rachel Miller wiped down the laminated menu with practiced efficiency, barely glancing at the familiar breakfast specials she'd memorized years ago. The Sunrise Diner sat wedged between a laundromat and a pawn shop on the less glamorous side of Westbrook, its neon sign flickering intermittently like an uncertain heartbeat. The morning rush had dwindled, leaving behind coffee-stained mugs and the lingering scent of maple syrup and bacon. Outside, grey clouds threatened rain, matching Rachel's mood as she calculated how far her tips would stretch toward this month's rent. The bell above the door chimed, and Rachel looked up to see an elderly man hesitating at the entrance. He stood ramrod straight, despite his apparent age, dressed in an impeccably tailored grey suit that seemed oddly formal for the humble diner. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his weathered face bore the dignified lines of someone who had witnessed much of life's offerings. What caught Rachel's attention most, however, was the uncertainty in his pale blue eyes as they scanned the nearly empty restaurant. "Sit anywhere you'd like, sir," Rachel called out with her best customer service smile. "I'll be right with you." The man nodded, making his way to a corner booth with deliberate steps. Rachel noticed he carried no phone, no newspaper, just himself and a small leather-bound notebook. As she approached with a menu and water, she observed how his hands trembled slightly as he accepted them. "First time at the Sunrise?" she asked conversationally. "Indeed," he replied, his voice cultured yet warm. "Walter?" "Walter Cunningham. I'm Rachel. Our hash browns are the best in town, and the blueberry pancakes aren't half bad either." Something in Walter's expression softened. Blueberry pancakes it is then, and coffee black. That first encounter established what would become a daily ritual. Walter arrived promptly at 8:15 each morning, ordered the same breakfast, and lingered over his coffee while making occasional notes in his small book. Rachel learned he had recently moved to the neighborhood after too many years elsewhere, as he put it. He never elaborated, and she never pried. Days turned to weeks, and Walter became a fixture at the diner. Unlike most regulars who treated servers as invisible conveniences, Walter looked Rachel in the eye when speaking to her. He asked about her day and listened to her answers with genuine interest. When she mentioned struggling through night classes in business administration, he asked thoughtful questions about her studies. "Why business?" he inquired one slow Tuesday morning. Rachel shrugged, refilling his coffee cup. "I want options. My mom waited tables her whole life, barely making ends meet. I want something more stable." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "A sound strategy, though I've found life rarely follows our carefully laid plans." As autumn deepened, Rachel noticed worrying changes in Walter. Some mornings he seemed confused about his order. Once he forgot his leather notebook, panicking until Rachel retrieved it from the lost and found. Most concerning were the days when his hands trembled so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup. On a particularly difficult morning, Rachel quietly placed a straw in his orange juice without comment. The grateful look he gave her spoke volumes. "My daughter thinks I should move into one of those assisted living facilities," Walter confided later that week. "Says I can't manage on my own anymore." "And what do you think?" Rachel asked, sliding into the booth across from him during her break. "I think independence is worth fighting for, even when it becomes difficult." His eyes, still sharp despite his physical decline, met hers. "Sometimes dignity is all we have left." The next day, Walter forgot his wallet. Rachel covered his bill without hesitation. "I'll pay you back tomorrow," he insisted, clearly embarrassed. "Don't worry about it. You've tipped me well for months. Consider it a balancing of accounts." Walter's smile was tinged with sadness. "You're a rare soul, Rachel Miller." Their unlikely friendship deepened through small kindnesses. When Walter mentioned having trouble with the stairs to his apartment, Rachel helped him locate the building manager's number to request a first-floor unit. When he struggled with the tiny buttons on his coat one blustery morning, she gently assisted without making him feel helpless. In return, Walter offered something Rachel rarely encountered in her daily life: respect. He treated her not as a waitress, but as a person of value. On her birthday, which she had mentioned only in passing weeks earlier, he presented her with a first edition of a business strategy book she had admired. "How did you remember?" she asked, stunned by the thoughtful gift. "Some things are worth remembering," he replied simply. The morning everything changed began like any other. Rachel arrived for her shift, tied on her apron, and prepared for the breakfast crowd. Walter came in at his usual time, ordered his usual meal. The diner hummed with normal activity until the door swung open at precisely 9:30. 4 imposing men in dark suits entered, flanking a petite woman in a charcoal skirt suit. Her heels clicked authoritatively against the linoleum as she scanned the diner. When her gaze landed on Walter, her red-painted lips curved into a tight smile. The four men, clearly bodyguards, took positions around the diner while the woman approached Walter's booth. "Mr. Cunningham," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm Caroline Bennett from Whitaker, Prescott and Associates. We've been searching for you for quite some time." Walter's face drained of color. "I told Whitaker I wanted to be left alone." "When a man of your prominence disappears, people notice," Caroline replied, "particularly when there are matters of substantial importance awaiting your attention." Rachel froze by the coffee machine, watching the scene unfold. Walter's eyes met hers briefly, filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name, regret perhaps, or resignation. Caroline slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "Your signature is required on these documents. The future of Cunningham Industries depends on it." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. Cunningham Industries, the technology conglomerate whose founder had mysteriously stepped away from public life nearly a year ago. The empire whose products and services touched millions of lives. That Cunningham. She stared at Walter, her Walter, the gentle old man who struggled with coat buttons and treasured blueberry pancakes, and suddenly saw him with new eyes. Walter Cunningham wasn't just any elderly man seeking connection in a lonely world. He was Walter Cunningham, the billionaire industrialist whose face had once graced magazine covers, whose innovations had changed modern life, and whose abrupt disappearance from public view had sparked endless speculation. And somehow, impossibly, he had chosen her diner, her section, her friendship, though she couldn't begin to understand why. Caroline Bennett turned to face Rachel, her expression coolly assessing. "You must be the waitress. I believe we need to have a conversation as well." Rachel felt the eyes of every customer in the diner fixed on her. Her throat went dry as she clutched the coffee pot tighter, unsure how to respond. "I'm just his waitress," she managed to say, her voice barely audible over the suddenly hushed diner. Caroline's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. "Is that so? Mr. Cunningham's driver has observed him coming here daily for months. The security team reports frequent conversations beyond typical server-customer interaction. And then there are the small errands, picking up his prescriptions, helping him navigate city services, accompanying him to doctor's appointments." Rachel's face flushed. She hadn't realized they were being watched. Those moments had felt private, just two people helping each other through life's challenges. "Leave her out of this," Walter said, his voice stronger than Rachel had heard in weeks. "She's done nothing wrong." One of the bodyguards shifted uncomfortably, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket. Rachel noticed how the other diners had begun discreetly recording the confrontation on their phones. By nightfall, this scene would likely be trending on social media. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," Caroline suggested, glancing meaningfully at the growing audience. Walter closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. "Very well, but Rachel comes too." Caroline looked like she wanted to object, but instead pressed her lips into a thin line. "As you wish. Our car is waiting outside." "I can't just leave," Rachel protested, gesturing around the half-full diner. "I'm working." From behind the counter, Mike, the diner's owner, waved her off. "Go, Rachel. Whatever this is, it seems important. Tina can cover your tables." Minutes later, Rachel found herself in the back of a sleek black SUV with tinted windows, sandwiched between Walter and one of the bodyguards. Caroline sat across from them, her attention focused on a tablet in her lap. The vehicle moved smoothly through Westbrook's modest streets, heading toward the affluent district across town. "I owe you an explanation," Walter said quietly. His voice meant only for Rachel, though I'm not sure where to begin. "How about with why a billionaire has been eating $5 pancakes in my diner every morning?" Rachel suggested, still struggling to reconcile the Walter she knew with the titan of industry now revealed. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Because they're excellent pancakes, and because at the Sunrise Diner, I was just Walter, not the founder of Cunningham Industries, not the man whose decisions affected thousands of employees, not the eccentric billionaire whose every move was scrutinized and interpreted." He sighed, looking out the window at the passing scenery. "Do you know what it's like when people see your net worth before they see you? When every relationship comes with unspoken calculations of what might be gained?" The SUV turned onto a tree-lined boulevard where elegant houses sat back from the road behind tasteful landscaping. "After my wife died last year, the emptiness of that house," he gestured toward what lay ahead, "became unbearable. The board was pushing me to step down, claiming concerns about my health. My daughter wanted me under supervised care. Everyone had opinions about what was best for me, for the company, for the Cunningham legacy. So you just walked away? Rachel asked incredulously. I didn't abandon my responsibilities entirely, Walter clarified. I appointed interim leadership. I made provisions. I simply needed space to breathe, to remember who I was beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. Caroline cleared her throat. What Mr. Cunningham neglects to mention is that his space to breathe caused the company stock to plummet 15%. His sudden disappearance sparked rumors of mental decline, illness, even death. The board has been in crisis mode for months. I left contact information with Whitaker, Walter countered, for genuine emergencies. Which this is, Caroline replied, her tone brooking no argument. The Jensen merger cannot proceed without your authorization, and the deadline is tomorrow. The future of 3 divisions and nearly 5,000 jobs hangs in the balance. Walter's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of responsibility visibly settling back onto him. Rachel felt a surge of protectiveness. Why bring me along for this? She asked, gesturing at the opulent surroundings they were now approaching. I don't belong in this world. Walter turned to her, his pale blue eyes serious. Because you're the only person in my life right now who sees me as I am, not for what I have or what I can provide, and because I need someone on my side who has no stake in Cunningham Industries. The SUV pulled through wrought iron gates that opened silently at their approach, revealing a sweeping driveway that curved toward an imposing Georgian-style mansion. As they came to a stop at the entrance, Walter reached over and squeezed Rachel's hand. I understand if you want no part of this. I can have them drive you back to the diner immediately. His expression was solemn. But if you're willing, I could use a friend today. Rachel looked from Walter to the intimidating house before them, then to Caroline's impatient expression. Everything in her screamed that she didn't belong here, among wealthy executives and corporate intrigue. She should return to the familiar comfort of the diner, to her orderly life of work and study. Yet the thought of leaving Walter alone to face whatever awaited him inside that mansion, to be once again surrounded by people who viewed him as an asset rather than a person, felt wrong. He had shown her kindness when he had nothing to gain. Perhaps now she could return that kindness when he needed it most. I'll stay, she said finally, but I know nothing about mergers or corporate law. Relief washed over Walter's face. You don't need to. Just be your straightforward self. That's more valuable than you might think. As they exited the vehicle, Rachel smoothed down her diner uniform, acutely aware of how out of place she must appear. Caroline was already ascending the marble steps, the bodyguards falling into formation around them. Walter offered Rachel his arm, a courtly gesture that somehow made her stand taller. Ready to face the lions? He asked with a wry smile. Rachel took a deep breath and nodded. Whatever happened beyond those imposing doors, she had a feeling her life would never be quite the same. The interior of the Cunningham mansion was exactly as Rachel had imagined a billionaire's home would be. Soaring ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, and artwork that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. Yet as Caroline led them through the grand foyer toward what appeared to be a study, Rachel noticed something else, an emptiness that echoed in every perfect room. Despite the opulence, the house felt unlived in, more museum than home. The board members will be joining us virtually in 15 minutes, Caroline announced, gesturing toward an imposing mahogany desk equipped with multiple monitors. Mr. Whitaker is already waiting in the conference room with the merger documents. Walter nodded, his expression resigned. Turning to Rachel, he said, Would you like a tour while they set things up? I find I'm reluctant to dive into corporate matters without at least showing you where I've spent most of my life. Caroline checked her watch pointedly. Mr. Cunningham, there are pressing— 15 minutes, you said, Walter interrupted, a flash of the powerful executive he once was, breaking through his elderly demeanor. I believe I can spare 10 of those for my guest. Without waiting for a response, Walter guided Rachel through a doorway into what appeared to be a more intimate sitting room. Here, the formal perfection of the entrance gave way to subtle signs of actual living. A worn spot on an otherwise pristine leather chair, bookshelves filled with well-read volumes rather than decorative bindings. This is more like it, Rachel commented, noticing how Walter's tension seemed to ease slightly in this room. Margaret, my late wife, insisted we have spaces in the house that weren't for show, Walter explained, his voice softening at the mention of his wife. Said a person needed somewhere they could put their feet up without worrying about the upholstery. He moved to a side table where silver-framed photographs stood in neat rows. This was Margaret, he said, handing Rachel a frame containing the image of an elegant woman with kind eyes and Walter's same genuine smile. Married 52 years, she was the compass of my life, always pointing me true north when business success threatened to corrupt my values. Rachel studied the photograph, seeing the obvious love between the younger Walter and his wife. "She's beautiful. You must miss her terribly." "Every day," Walter confirmed, returning the frame to its place. After she passed, this house became intolerable. Every room held memories, yet felt empty without her laughter. He gestured around them. All this, the wealth, the company, the so-called empire, meant nothing without someone to share it with. As they moved through the house, Walter shared snippets of his history. He pointed out the kitchen where he and Margaret had cooked Sunday dinners for their daughter Elizabeth, now a successful surgeon in Boston, with children of her own. He showed Rachel the sun-drenched conservatory, where his wife had tended exotic orchids. Each space revealed another facet of the man Rachel had come to know over blueberry pancakes and coffee. "And this," Walter said, stopping before a closed door, "was my sanctuary." He pushed open the door to reveal not the executive office Rachel had expected, but a modest workshop filled with tools, electronic components and half-completed projects. Workbenches lined the walls, and blueprints covered a large central table. "Most people forget that before I was CEO of Cunningham Industries, I was an engineer," Walter explained, his eyes brightening as he moved among his creations. "The company began in a garage not much bigger than this room, with just an idea and stubborn determination." Rachel examined a complex mechanism on the nearest bench. "You still invent things?" "Try to," Walter chuckled. "The hands aren't as steady as they once were, but the mind still works. These days I focus on simpler solutions, practical innovations, to help aging individuals maintain independence." He lifted a modified eating utensil with a stabilizing gyroscope built into the handle. When you struggle to bring a spoon to your mouth without spilling, dignity at mealtime becomes a serious quality of life issue. Rachel thought of Walter's trembling hands at the diner, how he'd sometimes needed to use both to lift his coffee cup. These inventions weren't abstract exercises, they were personal. "Why aren't these on the market?" she asked. "They could help so many people." Walter's expression darkened. "The board considers the aging market unprofitable. Not enough return on investment to justify development costs. They prefer focusing on consumer electronics with planned obsolescence and luxury price points." Before Rachel could respond, Caroline appeared at the doorway, her displeasure evident. "Mr. Cunningham, Mr. Whitaker is growing impatient, and the board members are connecting as we speak." Walter sighed, the brief animation fading from his features. "Of course. We mustn't keep them waiting." To Rachel, he added quietly, "Now you see what I was escaping at your diner." They followed Caroline to a state-of-the-art conference room where an elderly man in an expensive suit sat surrounded by documents. Large screens on the wall displayed the serious faces of men and women in business attire, the Cunningham Industries Board of Directors. All conversation ceased when Walter entered. "Walter," the elderly man rose, extending his hand, "thank God you've returned to your senses. We have less than 24 hours to salvage this merger." "George," Walter acknowledged with a nod, "I see the situation remains as dire as Caroline described." George Whitaker, who Rachel gathered was Walter's longtime attorney, glanced dismissively in her direction. "And this is—" "My guest," Walter said firmly. "Rachel stays." A woman on one of the screens leaned forward. "Walter, with all due respect, this is a confidential board matter involving sensitive corporate information. Having an unvetted individual present creates significant liability issues." Walter remained unmoved. "Rachel Miller has shown me more genuine concern and respect in the past months than this board has in years. Either she stays, or I leave. And this time, I'll ensure not even George can find me." The implicit threat hung in the air. After a tense silence, George gestured resignedly toward an empty chair. "Very well. Miss Miller, please understand that anything discussed in this room falls under strictest confidentiality." As Rachel sat beside Walter, the corporate drama unfolded before her. The Jensen merger, she learned, would combine Cunningham Industries technology with Jensen Healthcare's distribution network, potentially revolutionizing medical device accessibility. However, Jensen's CEO had insisted on Walter's personal involvement and signature, distrusting the interim leadership's commitment to the original vision. The problem, explained a sharp-faced board member identified as Trevor Phillips, is that the Jensen deal blocks our more lucrative opportunity with next-gen technologies. Their offer would increase shareholder value by an estimated 22%. While gutting our medical innovation division, Walter countered, the division Margaret cared about most. Trevor's expression hardened. With all respect to Margaret's memory, we have a fiduciary duty to maximize returns. Sentiment has no place in these decisions. As the debate intensified, Rachel observed the dynamics with growing clarity. The board saw dollar signs where Walter saw his life's work and his wife's legacy. They spoke of market capitalization, while he thought of patients who would benefit from affordable medical technology. It was as if they were having entirely different conversations. During a brief recess, Rachel followed Walter to a small balcony overlooking immaculately landscaped grounds. He looked exhausted, the morning's events clearly taking their toll. "They're going to push you out completely, aren't they?" Rachel asked quietly. "That's what this is really about. The merger is just the battleground." Walter nodded, gazing out at the garden Margaret had once tended. "Trevor has been orchestrating this for years. He sees the company as nothing but a vehicle for profit. The fact that I disappeared gave him the perfect ammunition, proof that I'm unstable, unfit to lead." "But it's your company," Rachel protested. "Can't you just fire him?" "Corporate governance is rarely so simple," Walter explained. "I may have founded Cunningham Industries, but going public meant creating a board with legal obligations to shareholders. My controlling interest is significant but not absolute." He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "You know what I realized at your diner? That I've been fighting the wrong battle. I've been trying to preserve control of a company that has evolved beyond my original vision. Perhaps it's time to let go, but on my terms, not theirs." Rachel studied the man before her, not the frail customer she'd served pancakes to, nor the legendary billionaire of magazine covers, but something in between, a man of principle facing difficult choices. "What will you do?" she asked. A hint of the old spark returned to Walter's eyes, something they won't expect. When they returned to the conference room, Walter approached the documents with renewed purpose. Rachel watched as he reviewed each page carefully, occasionally consulting with George in hushed tones. The board members grew increasingly restless as the hours passed. "Is there a problem with the agreements, Walter?" Trevor finally demanded. Walter looked up, his expression unreadable. "Not with the Jensen merger. I'll sign those immediately." He slid the signed documents across the table to George. "It's the other matter we need to discuss." "What other matter?" Trevor asked warily. Walter removed his small leather notebook from his pocket, the same one he'd written in daily at the diner. "I've been planning this for some time, George. Would you distribute copies of the document I had you prepare last month?" George hesitated, then nodded, retrieving a folder from his briefcase. As copies were distributed to the stunned board members, Walter turned to Rachel with a small smile. "Sometimes," he whispered, "the best move in chess isn't the one your opponent expects." The conference room erupted into chaos as the board members reviewed Walter's document. Trevor Phillips's face flushed crimson, while others wore expressions ranging from shock to outrage. Only George Whitaker remained composed, though Rachel noticed a hint of satisfaction in the elderly attorney's eyes. "This is preposterous," Trevor finally sputtered, slapping the document onto the table. "You can't possibly be serious, Walter." "I've never been more serious," Walter replied calmly. "As the document states, I am exercising my right as majority shareholder to restructure the company. Effective immediately, Cunningham Industries will be split into two distinct entities. Cunningham Consumer Technologies, which will continue under the current board's direction, and Cunningham Medical Innovations, which will be established as a benefit corporation with a legally protected social mission." Rachel tried to make sense of the corporate maneuvers being discussed. From what she could gather, Walter was essentially dividing his empire, surrendering control of the profitable consumer division while safeguarding the medical technology branch that meant so much to him and his late wife. "You're throwing away billions in potential profit," a board member argued through the video feed. "The medical division's patents alone will remain with Cunningham Medical Innovations," Walter interrupted, "where they'll be used for their intended purpose, improving lives, not merely enriching shareholders." Trevor leaned forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "The board won't approve this. We'll challenge it in court." George cleared his throat. "Actually, Trevor, Walter's controlling interest gives him the authority to initiate this restructuring. The bylaws are quite clear, and given the questionable tactics certain board members have employed recently, including unauthorized surveillance of Walter during his personal leave of absence, I wouldn't recommend inviting judicial scrutiny. The pointed look George gave Trevor spoke volumes. Rachel recalled Caroline mentioning a driver observing Walter's daily visits to the diner. Apparently, Walter's attorney had been gathering ammunition of his own. Furthermore, Walter continued, as outlined on page 7, I'm appointing new leadership for Cunningham Medical Innovations. He glanced at Rachel, a twinkle in his eye. Someone who values people over profit margins. For one heart-stopping moment, Rachel thought Walter might name her, which would have been patently absurd. Instead, he announced, Dr. Elizabeth Cunningham will return from her surgical practice to serve as CEO, bringing both medical expertise and a commitment to the company's new mission. The revelation that Walter's daughter would lead the medical division clearly caught the board by surprise. Several members began whispering urgently to each other, while Trevor stared at Walter with undisguised hostility. And what about you, Walter? Asked an older woman on one of the screens, her tone more respectful than the others. Where do you fit into this new structure? I'm stepping back, Diane, Walter replied. Not away, but back. I'll serve as chairman emeritus of both entities, but my active involvement will be limited to what I truly love, inventing, tinkering, solving problems. I've spent too many years in boardrooms and not enough in workshops. As the meeting continued, with George meticulously addressing legal questions and outlining transition timelines, Rachel observed Walter closely. Despite the tension surrounding them, he appeared more at peace than she'd ever seen him. The burden of running a massive corporation while trying to preserve its soul had visibly lifted. When the meeting finally adjourned 2 hours later, most of the board departed quickly, already on phones with advisors and allies. Trevor lingered, approaching Walter with a stiff formality that barely masked his fury. You won't get away with this, he said quietly. There are ways to overturn even the most carefully constructed plans. Walter met his gaze steadily. Perhaps, but ask yourself this, Trevor. Would winning that battle be worth the cost to your reputation when all the details come to light? George has prepared quite a thorough dossier on certain decisions made during my absence. Trevor's jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned and strode from the room, the door closing with deliberate softness behind him. That man, George commented, has never understood that some fights aren't worth winning. Walter nodded, then turned to Rachel with a tired smile. I imagine this has been quite an overwhelming day for you. That's putting it mildly, Rachel agreed. I'm still trying to process how the man who needed help buttoning his coat is the same person who just restructured a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Walter chuckled. Both versions are real. The physical limitations of aging are no less genuine than my business acumen. One doesn't negate the other. George excused himself to make calls, leaving Rachel and Walter alone in the cavernous conference room. For a moment, neither spoke, the events of the day settling around them like dust after an explosion. You planned this all along, didn't you? Rachel finally asked. Even while you were coming to the diner, you were plotting this corporate chess move. Walter considered her question. Not exactly. When I first walked into the Sunrise, I was genuinely seeking escape. A place where I could be anonymous, where my trembling hands didn't represent weakness to people waiting to usurp my position. He gazed out the window at the fading afternoon light. What I found instead was perspective. Watching you work so diligently, hearing about your studies, seeing how you treated every customer with dignity regardless of their station, it reminded me of values I'd let slide in the corporate arena. He turned back to her, his expression earnest. You reminded me of Margaret in a way, not in appearance or manner but in clarity of purpose. She never lost sight of what truly mattered, even when success and wealth surrounded us. Rachel felt both flattered and uncomfortable with the comparison. I'm nothing special, Walter, just doing my job. And therein lies your uniqueness, Walter countered. You do just your job with integrity and kindness. Do you know how rare that is? How valuable? Before Rachel could respond, the conference room door opened, and a striking woman in her mid-50s entered. Though elegantly dressed in a tailored pantsuit, she carried herself with a doctor's practical confidence. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver, was cut in a sensible bob, and her eyes, the same pale blue as Walter's, widened at the sight of him. Dad, she breathed, crossing the room in quick strides. Elizabeth, Walter replied, standing to embrace his daughter. You made good time from Boston? I took the company jet the moment George called, Elizabeth explained, holding her father at arm's length to study him. You look better than I expected, given your disappearing act. Walter smiled. Being away from boardrooms agreed with me. He turned toward Rachel. Elizabeth, I'd like you to meet Rachel Miller. She's been looking after your old man these past few months, though she didn't know who she was dealing with. Elizabeth extended her hand. So, you're the mysterious waitress I've been hearing about from our security team. Thank you for being kind to my father when he was determined to be difficult. Rachel shook her hand, feeling increasingly out of place in this family reunion. He was never difficult, just a regular customer who became a friend. A friend who apparently helped convince my father to revolutionize our family business, Elizabeth remarked, her tone difficult to interpret. George briefed me on the restructuring plan. It's bold, Dad, even for you. It's necessary, Walter replied. You'll understand once you've reviewed the full situation. Trevor and his faction have been systematically dismantling everything your mother and I built. The focus on quarterly profits above all else, the shelving of potentially life-changing medical innovations because the target market isn't wealthy enough. His voice trailed off, the frustration evident. Elizabeth's expression softened. I know. I've been watching from afar, feeling increasingly disconnected from the company's direction. That's partly why I stayed in clinical practice. She glanced at Rachel, then back to her father. But are you sure I'm the right person to lead the medical division? I haven't worked in corporate settings for years. That's precisely why you're perfect, Walter countered. You've remained connected to the real purpose of medicine, helping patients. The division needs someone who sees beyond balance sheets to the lives our technology can improve. As father and daughter continued discussing the transition, Rachel felt increasingly superfluous. The day's events had transported her far from her familiar world of order slips and coffee refills into a realm of corporate power plays and family legacies. It was fascinating but alienating, highlighting the vast chasm between Walter's world and her own. When there was a natural break in the conversation, Rachel stood. I should probably head back to the diner. Mike will be wondering what happened to me. Walter looked dismayed. Of course, how thoughtless of me to keep you so long. George can arrange for a car to take you back. Actually, Elizabeth interjected, studying Rachel with newfound interest, if you're not in a rush, I'd like to hear more about these past few months. From what George tells me, you've seen a side of my father few people get to witness. Something in Elizabeth's tone made Rachel pause. Not suspicion exactly, but careful assessment, as if Rachel represented a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit Elizabeth's understanding of her father. There's not much to tell, Rachel replied cautiously. He came for breakfast, we talked, and I helped him with small things when his hands gave him trouble. Small kindnesses that meant everything, Walter added quietly. Rachel treated me as a person, not a potential opportunity or a burden to be managed. Elizabeth's expression softened slightly at her father's words. Then I definitely want to hear more. Would you join us for dinner? The chef has already been alerted that we'll be eating in tonight. The invitation, while politely delivered, carried a subtle weight of obligation. Rachel sensed that declining would disappoint Walter, yet accepting meant further immersion in a world where she didn't belong. I should at least call Mike and let him know I won't be back for my shift, she hedged. Walter brightened. Of course, use the phone in my study, and perhaps you'd like to freshen up. Caroline can show you to a guest room where you can rest before dinner. Before Rachel could formulate a response, she found herself whisked away by the efficient Caroline, who led her through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors to a guest suite larger than Rachel's entire apartment. Left alone in the opulent room, Rachel sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to process the surreal turn her day had taken. This morning, she had been a waitress serving an elderly regular customer. Now she was a guest in a billionaire's mansion, somehow entangled in corporate restructuring and family dynamics she barely understood. As Rachel stared at her reflection in a gilt-edged mirror, still wearing her Sunrise Diner uniform, incongruously out of place against the luxury surrounding her, one question echoed in her mind. What did Walter Cunningham really want from her? Rachel emerged from the guest room after a brief but luxurious shower, dressed in borrowed clothes that Caroline had somehow produced in her exact size, simple black slacks and a blue blouse that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly rent. As she followed a staff member through the mansion's corridors toward the family dining room, she wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, Walter's kindness seemed genuine. On the other, years of struggling had taught Rachel to be wary of unexpected generosity. People with wealth and power rarely gave without expecting something in return. But what could Walter possibly want from a waitress with nothing to offer but small kindnesses? The dining room proved less formal than Rachel had feared. Instead of the cavernous hall she'd imagined, she entered a relatively intimate space, with a round table set for three. A wall of windows overlooked gardens now softly illuminated by landscape lighting. Walter and Elizabeth were already seated, their conversation pausing as Rachel entered. "Rachel, you look refreshed," Walter said warmly, rising to greet her. "I hope the accommodations were comfortable." "Everything's beautiful," Rachel replied honestly, taking the indicated seat. "Thank you for the clothes. I'll make sure they're returned before I leave." "Consider them a gift," Walter waved dismissively. "Small compensation for kidnapping you from your workplace." Dinner progressed with surprising ease. The food was exquisite but unpretentious. Roasted chicken, fresh vegetables from the estate's greenhouse, and homemade bread that reminded Rachel of Sunday dinners from her childhood. Elizabeth, initially reserved, gradually warmed as the conversation flowed. Rachel learned that Walter's daughter had chosen medicine against her father's initial wishes, determined to forge her own path rather than enter the family business. "He wanted me in the engineering department," Elizabeth explained, a fond smile softening her features. "Couldn't understand why I'd choose years of medical school when I could be building things immediately," Walter chuckled. "One of my many misjudgments, though in my defense you showed remarkable aptitude for mechanical design from an early age." "Only because you insisted on giving me circuit boards instead of dolls," Elizabeth countered good-naturedly. Rachel observed their easy banter with a pang of wistfulness. Despite their differences, the bond between father and daughter was evident, something Rachel had never experienced with her own absent father. As dessert was served, a simple but perfect apple tart, Elizabeth steered the conversation toward more serious matters. "Dad, we need to discuss your living arrangements going forward," she began carefully. "Now that you're back in the public eye, certain security considerations—" "I'm not moving back into this mausoleum full-time," Walter interrupted, his tone firm but gentle. "I've found a measure of peace in my simpler lifestyle." Elizabeth sighed. "I'm not suggesting you need round-the-clock supervision, but your apartment isn't secure, and after today's restructuring announcement, you'll be under increased scrutiny. Trevor and his allies won't take this lying down. Not to mention your health concerns," she added more softly. "The tremors are getting worse, aren't they?" Walter's hand stilled on his water glass. "Parkinson's progresses at its own pace. The medication helps most days." Rachel recalled the mornings when Walter had struggled with buttons and utensils, how he'd worked to mask his frustration. Those moments now carried deeper significance, knowing they represented not just age, but a progressive condition. "I've been managing," Walter insisted, meeting his daughter's concerned gaze. "And I've been working on adaptations." He glanced at Rachel. "Actually, my daily visits to the Sunrise provided valuable field testing for several of my prototypes." Rachel blinked in surprise. "The modified spoon you showed me in your workshop, you were using versions of that at the diner," Walter nodded. "Among other things. The weighted cup sleeve that stabilized my coffee mug, the magnetic button closures I retrofitted to my coat, all innovations born of necessity." "Which you insisted on testing yourself instead of hiring professionals," Elizabeth remarked, exasperation evident in her tone. "Professional testers don't provide authentic user experiences," Walter countered. "They follow protocols. Real-world application is messier, more revealing." As they continued discussing Walter's innovations, Rachel began to understand something that had puzzled her. "That's why you kept coming back, even on days when you seemed to be struggling more," she realized aloud. "You were documenting how well your adaptations worked under different conditions." "Partly," Walter acknowledged, though the blueberry pancakes were a significant draw, as was the company. His expression grew more serious. "But now that we've addressed the company's future, I need to consider my own. Elizabeth is right, my current living situation isn't ideal, especially with my condition." He turned to his daughter. "What if we converted the East Wing guest house? It's on a single level, easily modified for accessibility, and has its own entrance, close enough for security considerations, but separate enough to maintain independence." Elizabeth considered this. "That could work. We'd need to install additional safety features, perhaps a monitoring system for emergencies." As they discussed logistics, Rachel felt increasingly like an intruder in their family planning. She set down her napkin, preparing to excuse herself, when Walter suddenly turned to her. "Rachel, I have a proposition for you, one I hope you'll consider carefully before answering." Rachel tensed, the moment she'd been subconsciously anticipating all evening finally arriving. Here it was, whatever Walter truly wanted from her. "I'd like to offer you a position," he continued, "working with me on developing and refining assistive technologies for individuals with mobility challenges and age-related limitations." Of all the possibilities Rachel had imagined, this hadn't been among them. I don't have any engineering background, she stammered. I'm studying business administration, not design or medicine. Precisely why you're perfect, Walter countered. You have practical experience observing real-world challenges. You notice details most people miss, like when you started putting straws in my drinks before I had to ask, or found ways to help me maintain dignity when my hands wouldn't cooperate. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Technical skills can be taught. Empathy and observational intelligence are rarer qualities. You have both in abundance. Elizabeth, surprisingly, nodded in agreement. The medical division will need people who understand the human side of technology. Clinical trials and focus groups only reveal so much. Rachel's mind raced. The opportunity was extraordinary, a chance to leap from serving tables to meaningful work with significant impact. Yet doubt crept in. Was this genuine recognition of her abilities, or merely Walter's way of repaying perceived debts? This feels like charity, she finally admitted. Like you're creating a position because you feel obligated after I helped you. Walter's expression grew serious. Rachel, if there's one thing 50 years in business taught me, it's never to make hiring decisions based on sentiment. Cunningham Industries didn't become successful through charity appointments. He reached for a tablet on a side table, pulling up a folder of documents. These are notes I've been keeping since my second week at the Sunrise. Observations about which adaptive techniques worked in public settings, which modifications were too obvious or drew unwanted attention, how different environments affected usability. He passed the tablet to Rachel, who scrolled through page after page of detailed notes, many mentioning her by name, observations of how she'd instinctively accommodated his needs without making him feel helpless, suggestions she'd made without realizing their significance. You've already been doing the job, Walter said quietly. I'm just proposing we formalize the arrangement and provide proper compensation. Rachel looked up from the tablet, overwhelmed by the possibility unfolding before her. A career that mattered, work that helped people, learning opportunities beyond what she'd imagined possible, yet something still held her back. What about my degree? I'm halfway through my business program. Complete it, Elizabeth suggested. In fact, the company could cover your remaining tuition. Business acumen combined with your observational skills would make you even more valuable to the medical division. Walter smiled at his daughter's immediate support. The position would have flexible hours to accommodate your classes, and eventually, that business degree might position you for a management role in the adaptive technology division, if that interests you. The conversation continued late into the evening, addressing Rachel's questions and concerns. The role would start as a part-time consultant, allowing her to complete her education while gaining experience. She would work directly with Walter and a small team of engineers, providing insights from her unique perspective. By the time Walter's driver took Rachel home to her apartment, her mind was spinning with possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. She'd requested time to consider the offer, which both Walter and Elizabeth had readily granted. But in her heart, Rachel already knew her answer. 2 weeks later, Rachel entered Walter's workshop for her first official day. The space had been modified since her last visit. Additional workstations had been installed, and prototypes of various assistive devices lined the shelves. Walter sat at a central table, his hands steadied by a pair of specially designed gloves as he manipulated tiny components. "Ah, Rachel," he greeted her with evident delight. "Right on time. Come see what we're working on today." As Walter explained his latest innovation, a smart cane with fall detection and navigation assistance, Rachel noticed subtle changes in the man himself. Though his physical symptoms remained, there was a renewed energy in his movements, a spark in his eyes that had often been missing during his diner visits. Here, engaged in meaningful creation rather than corporate politics, Walter seemed more alive. Over the following months, their partnership flourished. Rachel's practical insights complemented Walter's technical genius, resulting in designs that were not only functional, but dignified and unobtrusive. Elizabeth, now fully established as CEO of Cunningham Medical Innovations, became a frequent visitor to the workshop, often bringing challenging cases from her medical contacts for them to solve. Walter's health had its good and bad days, but he approached his condition with the same problem-solving mindset he applied to engineering challenges. On particularly difficult mornings, Rachel would arrive early to find breakfast waiting. Blueberry pancakes made by Walter's chef, but served on the standard Sunrise diner plates he'd purchased specially. To remember where this all began, he explained with a wink. 1 year after the fateful day when lawyers and bodyguards had disrupted her routine at the Sunrise Diner, Rachel stood beside Walter and Elizabeth at the official launch of Cunningham Adaptive Technologies' first consumer product line. The press release highlighted how the devices were developed by users for users, emphasizing dignity and independence. As cameras flashed and reporters called out questions, Rachel felt Walter's hand on her shoulder. "Not bad for a waitress and a trembling old man, wouldn't you say?" he murmured, quiet enough that only she could hear. Rachel smiled, thinking of the unlikely journey that had brought her here, from serving pancakes to developing technology that would improve countless lives, from struggling student to rising executive with a corner office in the Cunningham Medical Innovations headquarters. "Not bad at all," she agreed, watching as the first demonstration models of their adaptive utensils were distributed to audience members. "Though I still make a better cup of coffee than your fancy machine." Walter laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Some skills can't be replaced by technology. Speaking of irreplaceable." He nodded toward the entrance, where Mike from the Sunrise Diner had just arrived with several of Rachel's former co-workers, all looking slightly overwhelmed by the upscale corporate environment. "You invited them?" Rachel asked, surprised and touched by the gesture. "Of course," Walter replied. "They're part of this story too. Everyone who creates something meaningful has help along the way, sometimes from unexpected sources." His expression grew more thoughtful. "Margaret used to say that true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give back. It took me losing almost everything to truly understand what she meant." As Rachel moved to greet her friends, she reflected on the strange sequence of events that had transformed her life. Walter Cunningham had walked into her diner seeking anonymity and found purpose instead. She had offered small kindnesses to an elderly customer and received opportunities beyond imagination in return. But the greatest gift wasn't the career advancement or financial security. It was the reminder that sometimes the most meaningful connections occur in the most ordinary places, over coffee cups and breakfast specials, through simple human kindnesses that ask for nothing in return. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Rachel joined Walter on the terrace of the building that now bore both their names, the Cunningham Miller Center for Adaptive Innovation. Below them, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, while above, the actual stars emerged in the darkening sky. "What would Margaret think of all this?" Rachel asked, genuinely curious about the woman whose memory had inspired so much. Walter smiled, gazing upward. "She'd say we're on the right track, and she'd be particularly fond of you, Rachel. She always could spot genuine character beneath the surface." He turned to her, his eyes clear and present in a way they hadn't been when he first entered the Sunrise. "You know, when I walked into your diner that first morning, I was looking for a place to hide from who I'd become. Instead, you helped me remember who I truly am." Rachel felt her eyes grow damp. "And you showed me possibilities I'd never dreamed existed." "Quite the fair exchange, wouldn't you say?" Walter offered his arm in the gentlemanly gesture that had become familiar over their months of collaboration. "Now, shall we go cut that ridiculous cake Elizabeth ordered? I believe she had them put both our faces on it." Rachel groaned. "Please tell me you're joking." Walter's laughter echoed in the evening air as they made their way back inside. Two unlikely friends whose simple connection had grown into something extraordinary. Proof that sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin with nothing more complicated than a cup of coffee, a plate of pancakes, and a moment of genuine human kindness.